글로벌 최신 시사 및 과학, 인문 트렌드 서머리 2026년 7월 2호 1. 정치, 국제관계 타픽 2026년 나토 정상회담 앙카라 유럽 국방자주성 지향 2026년 북대서양조약기구 나토 정상회담은 터키의 앙카라에서 열리며 트랜스 아틀란틱 시큐리티의 진화상의 비버터라고 트랜스포머티브한 모멘트를 연출했다. 유럽 대륙에서 계속되는 전쟁과 중동에서 진화되는 지어폴리티컬 텐션 속에서 열린 이 정상회담에서 알라이드 리더들은 빠르게 변화하는 필트를 마주하게 되었다. 최종적으로는 알라이드 국가의 국방 책임 분당이 다시 재배분되는데 이러한 트렌드는 미국의 유럽군의 점진적 철수로 인해 가속화되었다.
As the U.S. redirects its strategic priorities toward homeland security and the Indo-Pacific region, European nations are realizing the urgent need to build a stronger, more self-reliant security architecture. This emerging paradigm, increasingly referred to by defense analysts as NATO 3.0, demands that European allies move beyond mere financial pledges and rapidly translate their budgets into concrete military capabilities. Historically, NATO relied heavily on American military dominance to deter adversaries. However, the Ankara summit underscored that Europe must cultivate its own strategic autonomy. During the conference, allies reaffirmed their ironclad commitment to Article 5, the fundamental principle of collective defense. To back this commitment, European members and Canada highlighted significant increases in their defense investments. Furthermore, the summit emphasized the critical role of technological integration and industrial capacity in modern warfare. Discussions deeply explored the integration of artificial intelligence, AI, in defense procurement to streamline the production of vital equipment and overcome bureaucratic delays. U.S. President Donald Trump's presence added pressure as he demanded concrete capability targets rather than abstract promises. Ultimately, the 2026 Ankara summit served as a stark reminder that Europe must transition from relying on external guarantees to actively securing its own borders, transforming a moment of geopolitical crisis into a historic opportunity for structural reform.
Vocabulary Pivotal, adjective, 중대한, 중심축이 되는. The scientists' discovery played a pivotal role in curing the disease. Transformative, adjective, 변혁적인, 변화를 일으키는. The internet was a transformative invention for global communication. Autonomy, noun, 자율성, 자치권. The university encourages students to develop intellectual autonomy. Paradigm, noun, paradigm, 인식의 체계. Renewable energy has created a new paradigm in power generation. Deter, verb, 단념시키다, 억제하다. High fines are intended to deter people from littering. Ironclad, adjective, 철통 같은, 어길 수 없는. The two companies signed an ironclad contract that cannot be broken. Procurement, noun, 정부, 기관의 조달, 획득. The government is reviewing its defense procurement policies. Streamline, verb, 능률화하다, 간소화하다. We need to streamline the production process to save time. Abstract, adjective, 추상적인, 관념적인. It is hard for children to understand abstract concepts like justice. Stark, adjective, 냉혹한, 확연한. The stark reality is that we are running out of natural resources.
시사용어 해설 나토, 북대서양 조약기구 제2차 세계대전 이후 미국, 캐나다 및 서유럽 국가들이 공산주의 세력의 위협에 맞서기 위해 결성한 군사동맹체입니다. 제5조 아티클 5 집단 방위 조약 나토 회원국 중 한 나라가 공격을 받으면 나토 전체에 대한 공격으로 간주하여 공동으로 반격한다는 나토 조약의 핵심 조항입니다. 나토 3.0 미국의 군사력에 절대적으로 의존하던 과거의 모델에서 벗어나 유럽 국가들이 자체적인 방위 산업 역량을 키우고 AI와 같은 첨단 기술을 도입하여 유럽 중심의 방위력을 강화하는 새로운 안보 패러다임을 뜻합니다. 전략적 자율성, 스트라티직 오토노미. 다른 강대국, 예 미국의 군사력이나 외교적 결정에 의존하지 않고 스스로의 안보와 국방을 책임지고 결정할 수 있는 국가 또는 연합체의 능력을 의미합니다.
2. Economics and Society. Topic: IMF World Economic Outlook, the cross-currents of war and AI technology. The global economy is currently navigating a highly complex environment shaped by two powerful opposing forces: the lingering energy shocks caused by ongoing geopolitical conflict, and a massive investment boom driven by artificial intelligence, AI. According to the International Monetary Fund's July 2026 World Economic Outlook update, global growth is projected to remain resilient at 3.0% in 2026, followed by a slight rebound to 3.4% in 2027. However, this V-shaped recovery masks deep underlying structural inequalities among nations. The IMF report highlights that the traditional classification of advanced versus developing economies is becoming less relevant in the modern era. Instead, a country's economic destiny is now largely determined by its exposure to volatile energy markets and its successful integration into global technology value chains. Nations heavily reliant on energy imports are struggling with supply shocks and rising commodity costs, whereas countries leading in semiconductor production, digital infrastructure, and AI integration are experiencing unprecedented economic lifts. Despite the relatively stable growth outlook, global inflation remains a stubborn challenge. The disinflation trend that had brought prices down steadily since early 2024 has officially stalled, prompting the IMF to revise its 2026 global headline inflation forecast upward to 4.7%. To navigate these turbulent economic crosscurrents, the IMF advises governments to aggressively transition away from temporary energy subsidies and focus on building long-term macroeconomic resilience. Policymakers must prioritize restoring price stability, rebuilding fiscal buffers to handle future unforeseen crises, and heavily investing in AI readiness, electricity systems, and cybersecurity to secure a competitive edge in the rapidly evolving global market. Vocabulary: navigate. Verb: 항해하다, 복잡한 상황을 헤쳐나가다. The CEO successfully navigated the company through the financial crisis. Lingering. Adjective: 오래 끄는, 좀처럼 사라지지 않는. She still has a lingering cough from the cold she caught last month. Resilient. Adjective: 회복력 있는, 탄력 있는. Children are often highly resilient and adapt quickly to new environments. Underlying. Adjective: 근본적인, 밑에 숨겨진. We must solve the underlying cause of the problem, not just the symptoms. Volatile. Adjective: 변동성이 큰, 불안정한. Stock prices can be highly volatile during periods of political uncertainty. Integration. Noun. 통합. The integration of new technology into the classroom improved student engagement. Stubborn. Adjective: 고집스러운, 없애기 힘든. The stain on the carpet was so stubborn that I couldn't wash it out. Buffer. Noun. 원충장치, 원충제. Keeping some money in savings acts as a buffer against unexpected expenses. Infrastructure. Noun. 사회 기반 시설. The city needs to invest in its transportation infrastructure. Subsidize. Verb. 보조금을 주다. The government subsidizes public transportation to make it affordable.
시사용어 해설. IMF, 국제통화기금. 세계 무역 안정을 목적으로 설립된 국제기구로 회원국들에게 경제정책을 조언하고 외환위기를 겪는 국가에 자금을 지원하는 역할을 합니다. 디스인플레이션. 물가가 지속적으로 오르는 인플레이션 상태이긴 하지만 그 물가가 오르는 속도가 점점 느려지는 현상을 뜻합니다. 물가 자체가 지속적으로 하락하는 디플레이션과는 다릅니다. 헤드라인 인플레이션. 농산물이나 국제 유가 등 가격 변동이 매우 심한 품목까지 모두 포함하여 전체 물가 상승률을 계산한 가장 포괄적인 소비자 물가 지수를 의미합니다. 재정 완충 장치, 피스컬 버퍼. 국가가 예기치 못한 경제 위기나 재난이 발생했을 때 경제에 충격이 가지 않도록 선제적으로 마련해두는 여유 자금이나 재정적 여력을 말합니다.
3. Science and Technology. Topic: Harvard scientists turn a silicon chip into a DNA writing machine. In a groundbreaking advancement for the fields of biotechnology and computing, a research team led by Harvard University has successfully transformed a standard silicon chip into a microscopic DNA writing factory. Published in the prestigious journal Nature Electronics in July 2026, the study details how scientists designed a semiconductor chip capable of synthesizing 64 different DNA sequences simultaneously. Remarkably, this process is achieved using only electricity and water-based enzymes, eliminating the need for toxic chemicals. Traditionally, manufacturing synthetic DNA, which is crucial for biomedical research, genome engineering, and future data storage, relies on a chemical process known as phosphoramidite chemistry. This older method requires hazardous organic solvents and massive centralized facilities. In contrast, the newly developed chip offers a much cleaner and potentially portable alternative. The process works by utilizing precise, localized electrochemical control. Each of the 64 synthesis sites on the chip features a specialized pair of concentric ring electrodes. When a specific DNA strand needs to grow, the inner electrode generates protons to lower the pH level of the water exactly at that site, creating an acidic environment. This acidity triggers an enzyme to attach the next genetic building block, nucleotide. Simultaneously, the outer electrode acts as an active barrier, scavenging and neutralizing any protons that attempt to drift away. This strict confinement ensures the acidic reaction is isolated to the targeted sequence without chemically interfering with neighboring sites. This milestone demonstrates that DNA manufacturing could eventually become as programmable and scalable as modern electronics. To prove its efficacy, the team successfully encoded a 169-byte text using the 64 parallel synthesized DNA strands. Although researchers note that further chemical refinements are needed to pack the synthesis sites even closer together, this technology paves the way for a future where massive DNA data storage and on-demand desktop DNA printers are commonplace in laboratories worldwide. Vocabulary: synthesize. Verb: 합성하다. Plants synthesize sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to make food. Simultaneously. Adverb: 동시에. The game allows multiple players to connect and play simultaneously. Hazardous. Adjective: 위험한, 해로운. Workers in the chemical plant must wear gear to protect against hazardous materials. Alternative. Noun: 대안, 대체. Solar power provides a clean alternative to fossil fuels. Concentric. Adjective: 중심이 같은, 동심원의. When a stone is thrown into a pond, it creates concentric ripples. Confine. Verb: 국한하다, 제한하다. Please confine your remarks to the topic of the meeting. Scalable. Adjective: 확장이 가능한. Cloud computing is highly scalable, allowing businesses to grow easily. Refine. Verb: 개선하다, 정제하다. The engineers continue to refine the engine design to improve fuel efficiency. Efficacy. Noun: 효능, 유효성. The clinical trials proved the efficacy of the new vaccine. Encode. Verb: 암호화하다, 부호화하다. The secret message was encoded so that only the general could read it.
시사용어 해설. DNA 합성, DNA 신테시스. 자연 상태의 세포 분열 과정이 아니라 실험실에서 화학적 또는 전기적 방법을 이용해 인공적으로 DNA 가닥, 유전 정보를 만들어내는 기술입니다. 효소, 엔자임. 생명체 내부에서 일어나는 화학 반응의 속도를 빠르게 해주는 단백질입니다. 본문에서는 수성, 물 기반 환경에서 DNA 구성 물질을 결합시켜주는 역할을 합니다. pH 농도와 양성자, pH and protons. pH는 액체가 얼마나 산성 혹은 염기성인지를 나타내는 지수입니다. 전극에서 양성자, H+를 발생시키면 그 주변의 물이 산성으로 변하게 되어 DNA 합성을 막고 있던 차단 물질이 풀리면서 유전자 결합 반응이 시작됩니다. DNA 데이터 저장, DNA 데이터 스토리지. 컴퓨터의 0과 1 데이터를 DNA의 4가지 염기 A, C, G, T로 변환하여 생물학적 분자 형태로 정보를 저장하는 미래 기술입니다. 아주 작은 공간에 엄청난 양의 데이터를 수백 년 이상 보관할 수 있습니다.
Number 4. Environment and Earth Science topic. Record-shattering U.S. heat wave fueled by fossil fuels. In early July 2026, as the United States celebrated its 250th birthday over the 4th of July weekend, a severe and widespread heat wave blanketed the central and eastern regions of the country, shattering historical temperature records. According to a rapid assessment study published by the World Weather Attribution (WWA) initiative, this extreme weather event was driven by a persistent heat dome, a massive, slow-moving high-pressure system that trapped atmospheric moisture and incredibly warm air flowing from the Gulf of Mexico. While heat domes are naturally occurring atmospheric phenomena, the international team of climate scientists concluded that the staggering temperatures experienced this year would have been virtually impossible without the 1.4 degrees Celsius of background global warming caused by human fossil fuel emissions. During the heat wave, daytime temperatures consistently soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees C. More importantly, the scientific study deeply analyzed the wet bulb globe temperature, WBGT, a specialized index that combines temperature, humidity, wind, and solar radiation to accurately measure actual human heat stress. The WBGT reached its highest observed values on record across the study region. Health experts warn that when WBGT exceeds 28 degrees Celsius, physical outdoor activities become extremely dangerous and potentially lethal, even for young, healthy individuals. The WWA report highlighted that increasing atmospheric moisture, humidity, is escalating heat stress far more intensely than rising temperatures alone. Furthermore, the impacts of extreme heat are deeply unequal across society. Due to the urban heat island effect and historical discriminatory practices like redlining, some urban districts experience temperatures up to 7 degrees Celsius hotter than their wealthier, greener neighboring areas. As power grids face tremendous strain from heavy air conditioning usage, experts urge cities to rapidly deploy comprehensive heat action plans. These plans must include suspending power shutoffs and expanding cooling green spaces to protect vulnerable populations from increasingly lethal summers.
Blanket. Verb. 뒤덮다. A thick layer of snow blanketed the entire village overnight. Persistent. Adjective. 끊임없는, 지속적인. His persistent efforts finally led to a breakthrough in the research. Staggering. Adjective. 믿기 어려운, 충격적인. The cost of the new stadium was a staggering $2 billion. Virtually. Adverb. 사실상, 거의. It is virtually impossible to memorize the entire dictionary in one day. Exacerbate. Verb. 악화시키다. Heavy rain exacerbated the flooding in the downtown area. Escalate. Verb. 확대되다, 악화되다. The minor argument quickly escalated into a physical fight. Discriminatory. Adjective. 차별적인. The company was sued for its discriminatory hiring practices. Vulnerable. Adjective. 취약한, 상처 입기 쉬운. Older adults and children are more vulnerable to extreme heat. Deploy. Verb. 배치하다, 효율적으로 사용하다. The city plans to deploy more police officers in crowded areas. Comprehensive. Adjective. 포괄적인, 종합적인. The school offers a comprehensive program for gifted students.
시사 용어 해설. 열돔, 힛돔. 지상 수킬로미터 상공에 강력한 고기압이 뚜껑처럼 자리 잡아
뜨거운 공기가 흩어지지 못하고 지면 부근에 계속 갇혀 기온이 비정상적으로 오르는 현상입니다. 습구 훅구 온도, WBGT, 웻벌브 글로브 템퍼러처. 기온뿐만 아니라 습도, 복사열, 햇빛, 기류, 바람을 모두 종합하여 사람이 실제로 느끼는 온열 스트레스를 나타내는 지수입니다. 군사훈련이나 스포츠 경기의 안전 기준을 정할 때 주로 사용됩니다. 도시 열섬, 어번 히트 아일랜드. 아스팔트와 콘크리트로 덮인 도심 지역이 인공열과 태양열 흡수로 인해 주변의 숲이나 농촌 지역보다 기온이 훨씬 높게 나타나는 현상입니다. 레드라이닝. 과거 미국에서 은행 등 금융기관이 유색인종이나 저소득층이 많이 거주하는 특정 지역을 붉은 선으로 쳐서 대출이나 보험을 거절하던 인종차별적 정책입니다. 이 지역들은 오랫동안 투자를 받지 못해 나무나 공원, 녹지가 부족하여 폭염에 훨씬 더 취약합니다.
5. Health and wellness topic. Adolescents underestimate the deadly risk of fentanyl. A startling new study published in JAMA Network Open in July 2026 reveals a dangerous and growing knowledge gap among American teenagers regarding fentanyl, an exceptionally powerful synthetic opioid. Utilizing extensive data from the 2025 Monitoring the Future survey, researchers found that a majority of 8th graders, 48%, along with roughly 1/3 of 10th graders, 36%, and 12th graders, 30%, do not perceive a great risk in experimenting with fentanyl just once or twice. This misconception is profoundly alarming to health experts because the traditional drug risk framing, which suggests that danger increases gradually with repeated habitual use, does not apply to fentanyl. Fentanyl is up to 50 times more potent than heroin, meaning a single microscopic dose can instantly suppress the respiratory system and cause a fatal overdose. Today, drug poisonings and overdoses represent the third leading cause of death for American children and adolescents. Tragically, fentanyl plays a direct role in at least 75% of all adolescent overdose deaths. Compounding the danger is the highly deceptive nature of how teenagers are exposed to the drug. Most adolescent fentanyl poisonings are entirely unintentional. Teens often purchase what they believe to be standard, regulated prescription painkillers or anxiety medications via social media platforms. However, these counterfeit pills are frequently contaminated with or composed entirely of cheap and deadly fentanyl.
Additionally, between 9 and 17% of students reported knowing too little about the drug to even evaluate its danger, a figure similar to their lack of knowledge regarding heroin. The research underscores a critical and immediate need to revamp public health education in schools. Educators and public health officials must aggressively communicate the one pill can kill reality to protect youths from this unprecedented public health crisis. Vocabulary. Startling. Adjective. 깜짝 놀랄 만한, 놀라운. The report contained startling statistics about teen smoking. Perceive. Verb. 인지하다, 인식하다. Dogs perceive sounds that are too high-pitched for humans to hear. Profoundly. Adverb. 깊이, 엄청나게. The invention of the smartphone profoundly changed human communication. Potent. Adjective. 약효등이 강력한. The doctor prescribed a very potent antibiotic to fight the infection. Suppress. Verb. 억압하다, 마비시키다. The medication helps to suppress the immune system to prevent organ rejection. Unintentional. Adjective. 고의가 아닌, 무심코한. Her rude comment was completely unintentional, but it hurt my feelings. Counterfeit. Adjective. 위조에, 가짜에. The police arrested a gang selling counterfeit luxury bags. Revamp. Verb. 개조하다, 전면적으로 고치다. The company decided to revamp its entire website to attract more users. Unprecedented. Adjective. 전례 없는. The hurricane caused unprecedented damage to the coastal cities. Deceptive. Adjective. 기만적인, 속이는. Appearances can be deceptive. He looks angry but is actually very kind. 시사 용어 해설. 펜타닐. 극심한 고통을 겪는 말기 암 환자 등을 위해 개발된 마약성 진통제로 진통 효과가 헤로인의 50배, 모르핀의 100배에 달할 정도로 매우 강력합니다. 아주 적은 양으로도 호흡 정지로 사망에 이를 수 있습니다. 합성 오피오이드, 양귀비, 아편에서 추출한 자연 성분이 아니라 실험실에서 화학적으로 제조된 마약성 진통제를 뜻합니다. 제조 단가가 매우 저렴하여 불법 마약 시장에서 광범위하게 유통되고 있습니다. 과다 복용, 신체가 감당할 수 있는 한계를 넘는 양의 약물이나 마약을 섭취하여 호흡 곤란, 뇌 손상, 심장마비 등의 치명적인 증상을 겪는 상태입니다. 위조 약물, 카운터핏 필스, 불법 제조자들이 진짜 처방약, 예를 들면 타이레놀, 자낙스 등과 똑같은 모양, 색깔, 로고를 넣어 만들었지만 실제로는 치명적인 펜타닐이 섞여 있는 가짜 약을 의미합니다.
6. Culture, Arts, and Media. Topic: Martin Margiela's personal archives go to auction in Paris. In a historic and highly emotional event for the global fashion world, the famously enigmatic Belgian designer Martin Margiela opened his private universe to the public for the first time. On July 9, 2026, during Paris Couture Week, the elusive trailblazer personally auctioned 195 artifacts drawn directly from his private studio archives. Organized by Maurice Auction in collaboration with Carrie Taylor Auctions, this sale marked an unprecedented moment. It was the first time a living designer of his stature had collaborated directly with an auction house to release personal working materials. Margiela, who strictly guarded his privacy throughout his career and notoriously refused to be photographed before retiring in 2009, stunned the industry with this decision. Rather than presenting glamorous runway gowns, the curated items were deeply intimate fragments of his creative process. Highlights of the auction included Margiela's own blouse blanche, the iconic white studio lab coat worn by his team, an old rotary telephone completely painted in white with his number in marker, and miniature half-scale mannequins. The auction also featured around 60 historic Hermès garments designed by Margiela between 1997 and 2003, which uniquely belonged to his late mother, Leah Boucher. The designer, now 69 and without heirs, explained his heartfelt motivation in the auction catalog. After years of moving and loaning these artifacts, he wished to see them bring joy to collectors and museums worldwide. Emphasizing the charitable nature of the event, a portion of the estimated €412,000 total proceeds was pledged to an organization supporting the fight against AIDS. Ultimately, the auction was not merely a commercial sale, but a final ceremonial dispersal of a fashion legend's deeply guarded mythology.
Vocabulary. Enigmatic. Adjective. 수수께끼 같은, 불가사의한. The Mona Lisa is famous for her enigmatic smile. Elusive. Adjective. 찾기 힘든, 규정하기 힘든. The elusive criminal managed to escape from the police again. Trailblazer. Noun. 개척자, 선구자. Marie Curie was a trailblazer for women in the field of science. Artifact. Noun. 인공물, 유물. The museum displays ancient artifacts from the Roman Empire. Intimate. Adjective. 친밀한, 사적인. The diary contains her most intimate thoughts and secrets. Fragment. Noun. 조각, 파편. He found a fragment of an ancient pot buried in the dirt. Heir. Noun. 상속인, 후계자. The king had no son, so his daughter became the heir to the throne. Dispersal. Noun. 해산, 분산, 확산. The wind aided in the dispersal of the plant seeds across the valley. Unprecedented. Adjective. 전례 없는. The hurricane caused unprecedented damage to the coastal cities. Notorious. Adjective. 악명 높은. The hacker was notorious for breaking into secure government networks. 시사용어 해설. 메종 마르탱 마르지엘라. 옷의 구조를 해체하고 재구성하는 해체주의 패션을 이끈 전설적인 브랜드입니다. 상표를 드러내지 않는 하얀색 스티치, 바느질 4개와 디자이너가 절대 언론의 얼굴을 비치지 않는 익명성으로 매우 유명합니다. 아카이브. 개인이 남긴 기록물이나 역사적 가치가 있는 자료를 모아둔 저장소나 컬렉션을 뜻합니다. 패션에서는 디자이너의 초기 스케치, 시제품, 옷감 등이 모두 아카이브에 포함됩니다. 오트 쿠티르. 프랑스어로 고급 맞춤복을 뜻하며 패션 디자이너들이 예술성을 극대화하여 수작업으로 만드는 최고급 의상 컬렉션을 의미합니다. 타비 부츠. 발가락 부분이 엄지발가락과 나머지 4발가락으로 갈라져 있는 일본의 전통 버선, 타비 모양에서 영감을 받아 마르지엘라가 디자인한 상징적인 신발입니다.
Number 7. Education and Scholarship Topic. Generative AI in Classrooms. Task Performance versus Actual Learning Gains. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, released its Digital Education Outlook 2026, comprehensively shedding light on the rapidly growing presence of generative AI, Gen AI, in global classrooms. The report presents a crucial and timely paradox. While utilizing general-purpose Gen AI tools can significantly improve students' short-term performance on immediate tasks, it does not automatically translate to actual long-term learning gains. A compelling example cited in the report is a recent randomized controlled trial involving high school mathematics students in Turkey. Students who practiced math with the unchecked assistance of a generic Gen AI tool scored 48% higher during their practice sessions compared to the baseline group. However, when the AI tool was removed for the final exam, these same student scores alarmingly dropped by 17% below the baseline. The OECD warns that offloading heavy cognitive tasks to chatbots creates a high risk of metacognitive laziness. Students become overly reliant on the AI to quickly generate answers, entirely bypassing the productive mental struggle required to build independent critical thinking and robust problem-solving skills. This concern is echoed by educators, as 72% of surveyed lower secondary teachers believe AI can harm academic integrity. Conversely, the OECD report emphasizes that Gen AI can be highly beneficial if implemented with clear, structured pedagogical intent. Rather than using AI merely to fetch answers, tools designed specifically for education can act as interactive tutors that gently nudge students toward the right path through Socratic questioning. The OECD firmly recommends that governments and educators teach foundational skills without AI first. Once foundational knowledge is securely established, schools should selectively integrate educational Gen AI to foster creativity and analytical skills, ensuring that advanced technology augments human teaching rather than replacing essential cognitive effort.
Vocabulary. Generative. Adjective. 생성하는, 발생시키는. Generative models can create new images based on the data they learned. Paradox. Noun. 역설, 모순된 상황. It is a paradox that the more choices we have, the harder it is to decide. It is a paradox that the more choices we have, the harder it is to decide. Paradox. Noun. The harder it is to decide. 상황. It. Noun. The harder it is to decide. The harder it is to decide. Noun. The harder it is to decide. 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 The harder it is
is to decide, the harder it 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 is to decide, the harder